Welcome to you and all of your parts. Hi, I'm Laura Lively. In 2023, I recommended this book, The Loving Parent Guidebook. I said it was like IFS and 12 Step had a baby. And what I loved about it was it had all of this fabulous language as examples. It offered as examples on how to speak to your inner child, or in my case, to all of your parts. It was this loving, beautiful language because I found in my IFS practice that many people, they have no idea how to do that because that was not the way they were spoken to as children. So after that video, several people contacted me and asked if I would do a book club on the book, and we did. We went through all 22 chapters of that book, and I had a chance to really dive in and do some of the work significantly more deeply than I had when I at my first read through. So, kind of fast forward, one of the big ahas came as I struggled with some of the life changes that I've kind of shared with you all before. And I was really blended with a part during my own personal IFS sessions with my therapist. And I said to her, I was very upset. I said, I feel like a failure. And she said, who's the part who's judging you? And I was like, what? What do you mean? I don't know what you mean. I was like, no, I feel like a failure. And our time together, our session was coming to close, and she said, just consider it. So as I replayed that in my head, I was like, I don't get what she meant. I feel like a failure. And then finally, this like light bulb went off. Failure is not an emotion. It is a judgment. So in chapter 10 of this book, there is a whole chapter dedicated to feelings, and they really delve into what is a feeling and what is a judgment. And so in chapter 10, the title of the chapter, and I'm going to read some of it to you. The title of the chapter is Feeling is Healing. And in the chapter, they spend a lot of time explaining how children that are brought up in dysfunctional families learn to repress or distort their expressions and feelings because it was not safe for them to actually have them. And as such, many of us grew up not feeling our emotions and using whatever was available so that we didn't have those emotions. In my case, my firefighters use food and alcohol, shopping, binge reading, and watching something for hours on TV. So, chapter 10 challenged us to kind of learn to distinguish feelings from judgments. And so, I want to give you some examples from the book because our book club participants, many of us found ourselves scratching our heads, just like I did when my therapist said, who's judging you? So, here's an example. I feel ignored when my best friend doesn't return my text in a timely manner. Ignored is not a feeling. It is a judgment about my best friend who's not responded as quickly as I might want them to. So I'm going to read in the book, from the book. It's actually on page 103 if you happen to have the book. And so why that's important to distinguish between judgments and feelings. All right, let me find it. Our judgments and stories reinforce our tendency to live life from the viewpoint of victims and distract us from tending to our inner family members. We get trapped in the role of reactor versus actor when we focus on what we think others are doing to us rather than on what is happening inside us. Blaming others prevents us from taking constructive action. While another person's behavior can trigger our emotional response, our feelings come from our needs. Plus, our judgment might not be true, and we may miss the opportunity to better understand what happened. Perhaps my best friend is feeling overwhelmed with a personal issue and hasn't had a chance to respond to us. Perhaps her battery is dead. Who knows, right? I don't know, but I'm telling myself that I'm feeling ignored. I am feeling, um, you know, she's not my friend. Okay, those are not feelings. Ignored is me judging her for not acting in the way I want her to. So let's go back to my part. I'll speak for myself. My part that felt like a failure. Felt like a failure. Failure is not an emotional word. I was blended enough that I could not immediately understand what my therapist was trying to say to me when she's like, who's judging you? But ironically, on the very next page of this chapter, which I'd read 6 months earlier, was the exact phrase, I feel like a failure. So again, failure is not an emotion. It's a judgment. So now I got what my therapist was saying. There was a part of me judging me for feeling the way I was feeling. And the real question was, what was I actually feeling? Okay. And so the very next page of this book, if I had had it in my hand, what are you actually feeling if you feel like a failure? What I was actually feeling was I was feeling discouraged. I was feeling hopeless. I was scared and I was sad. That's what I was actually feeling. So, and it turned out when I could then realize there was a part judging me as therefore a failure because I wasn't doing the thing they wanted, I realized that that part was also scared and worried that I was going to fail or that things were happening. So I am inviting you to notice how this discussion about emotions versus judgments lands with you. Check right now. Then begin to notice when you're using words like I feel, what's the next word? And is it really an emotion? Because I wanted to argue with my therapist. I feel like a failure. That's legitimate. It's like a failure is not an emotion. So you can Google core emotions if you need a refresher about what is a word that's an emotional word versus a word that's not. If you happen to have the Loving Parent Guidebook, on Appendix D, as in David, on page 224, has a list of emotions and feelings. That's a good place. Also, somewhere in this book, which I couldn't find the exact chapter, but I did a video on it or a recording on it last year. There are really kind of four broad buckets of emotions, if it would be helpful for you to kind of categorize where you land. So you could ask yourself, am I feeling sad, mad, glad, or scared? Those are four broad buckets of emotions that might be a good place to start. So if you find yourself feeling something, it's probably one of those four that can probably kind of fall into one of those four: sad, mad, glad, or scared. That's a great way for you to kind of dip your toe in the water if you need to begin to recognize what emotions you're feeling. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope this was helpful for you to hear about my own parts and maybe have you consider, how are you using what comes after I feel when you say it? Start to notice it. Notice it whether you're thinking it, whether you say it out loud. And then drop me a comment at laura@lauralively.com. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss new content. And until next time, love to you and all of your parts.